so good to see so many young faces in that part of the auditorium and me up here. I used to be back down there for 6 years. So I've sat in probably almost every seat that you're sitting in right now. It's good to see Andrews going so well and seeing people being educated as Mrs. Andrews wanted. I wasn't always this old. At one point in time I was like you, but I look back on my life now and think I've been really blessed because there have been so many opportunities that I've had, and a lot of them had to do with Andrews. Andrews, when I came here, was known as, of course, a school for girls. It was to render girls self-supporting. It was a different era back then. You probably heard the story about Mrs. Andrews and her vision. But girls at that time were not expected to have jobs. It was just not done. You became a wife and mother, but if you had to have a job, you were either a servant or a nurse, later on a teacher. Sometimes they would let you become a stenographer, which is, they became secretary, now they're called assistants. But that was about it. There were not a lot of opportunities for women. And Mrs. Andrews thought this should change. So she had the vision to bring in girls who otherwise would not have any opportunities for jobs and teach all of us a skill that we could use to get a job in the real world. It was quite something back then. When I came to Andrews, I was part of the 50th beginning class. We were 7th grade, but we were the 50th class. That was 1960. You can't imagine even back that far. That was before your parents were born, I'm sure. But that was when we started here. I was a 12-year-old. I was absolutely terrified because I had no idea at all what to expect. And I had a rude awakening that I'll tell you about later. But one thing about Andrews, I called it was like a convent without the Catholicism. The rules were so strict. You had to conform or you were not invited back. We had a demerit system. You could get a demerit for breathing wrong. It was amazing. They would check in the lunch line every day, well, not every day, but most days, whether your skirt was long enough, whether you're wearing a full slip. You had to open your blouse a little bit so that they could see that you had a full slip on. It was just amazing the number of rules that we had as girls here at Andrews. But however, we had teachers that were absolutely amazing. They had, so I was talking to Faith and saying, our teachers had names of basically one-syllable nouns. We had Mr. Carr in the art class. We had Mrs. Wall in English. We had Mr. Boyle in history. We had Mr. Savage in music. We had our maintenance, the head of maintenance was Mr. Waste. This is true. I mean, I can't make this stuff up. We had this Mr. I'm trying to think. I had all these things on a list, and I'm 74, so I do forget from time to time. We had Mr. Waste for that. We had the doctor. The school doctor was Dr. Payne, and the gym teacher was Mrs. Kick. So, that's what we were dealing with. But our teachers, I swear, would disappear into the woodwork every night and come up in the morning. They were so dedicated. A lot of them were older ladies. Some of them had never married. Some of them were just all very, very dedicated to Mrs. Andrews' dream and to making this a really excellent, outstanding educational experience. My point is, with all of this, is Andrews prepared me more than any other school opportunity I had over the years to have a long career in journalism. And it was just one teacher, two teachers that did that. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But I went to Cleveland State. I became an elementary school teacher, which was my big dream. That's all I ever wanted to do my whole life. I came to Andrews, and in ninth grade we took an aptitude test. And that was to tell us what career path we were supposed to take. And I thought, oh, this is a no-brainer. Mine is going to end up telling me I need to be a teacher. So Miss Gray, the dean, called me in to go over my results. And she said, you know, two things came through very strongly. One more than the other. I said, well, I know it was teaching. She said, yes. One of them was teaching, but even stronger was your ability or your aptitude to be a newspaper editor. I thought, newspaper editor? I read newspapers, but I had no interest in doing that. But after teaching for 7 years and not being able to get back into the teaching profession for various reasons, because I had half a master's and 7 years of experience, and they could get a teacher right out of college much cheaper than me. So I had to end up, I substituted, I served on the local school board, kept in touch that way, but my teaching career was over. So a friend of mine asked me to start writing a local news column for a weekly paper. And I thought, well, that sounds like fun. Gradually, things happened to the point where I was a full-time reporter. And once, strangely enough, I was working for the Delaware Gazette in Delaware, Ohio, but I still had ties to the local newspaper, our News Herald here in Willoughby. And I went to the Ohio legislature to cover a meeting, a story for the Delaware Gazette. And while I was there, something else came up, and I'm thinking, wow, the people in Lake County need to hear this. So I took notes for that story as well. And I called the editor of the News Herald, and they said, sure, send it up. So in those days, it was kind of low tech. So I wrote the story, and I faxed it. I went to a place that had a fax machine, faxed it to the News Herald, and it ran on the front page above the fold the next day, as did my story for the Delaware Gazette. So I had two separate stories in two newspapers on the same day. And it doesn't happen very often in journalism. So journalism seemed to be my calling. Did a lot of other things in my life, but journalism seemed to be it. So I was young at one point, and that's me on the left. And that was the girls in my class, I call them still girls. We get together once a month, and they said, I can't remember seeing you without a camera in your hand. As a matter of fact, this is my purse. I saw it, I have to have that. Anyway, I went around with a camera in my hand. I had a teacher named Mr. House, who was the chemistry teacher here at Andrews, and he taught me in the 7th and 8th grade how to process black and white film and to make portraits and pictures and do all that kind of stuff. And it just, for some reason, interested me. So I ended up taking pictures. That is the school camera. They only had one. That was called a Crown Graphic. You may see them if you watch old movies. If there's a reporter, they usually have one of these in their hands. It's very heavy. It took 4x5 negatives that were about like this. We had 2 at a time, and it was very complicated to use, but they had excellent results. So I knew how to use the camera. I knew how to run the film. I knew how to print pictures. Knew how to process all of that stuff. So my mother took my portfolio, my work, to the local photographer, who gave me a job, and that helped pay for my college. Anyway, that was me, way, way back when. Okay. And because of that, I won the one and only that I know of anyway, the Andrews Photography Scholarship. Now, I'm telling you this because there's a story behind it. That's Mr. House, who taught all of us what we wanted to know in photography. This is me holding my check. That allowed me to come back to Andrews for my senior year. My parents were not going to pay for tuition for Andrews my senior year. It was the first year Andrews started charging tuition. My parents were not going to pay for that. They could, but it was more important to educate my brothers. So my parents said, no, you're going to have to go to Mentor High School next year. We're not paying that. Same thing when I went to college. It's more important to educate your brothers. This was the thinking back then. about girls going to college. So my parents, even though they could, my father said, well, I will let you live in this house, but you're going to have to figure out how to pay for your college. So I worked in the darkroom, I worked at McDonald's, I carried mail. I was the first female mail carrier in the city of Eastlake. I did whatever had to be done to pay for my college education. But that scholarship allowed me to stay at Andrews one more year. Okay, this was what we had at that time was Sing Out. We were unique. In June, we would gather in our formal gowns, and the seniors would be up on the stage, and the juniors would be on the sides, and risers, and we would sing beautiful songs. We carried roses, and at the end, we would pass our roses on to the juniors and walk out, symbolically turning Andrews over to the next class. It was tearful. We would sing the Andrews, I don't know if you still do the alma mater, but we would sing the Andrews alma mater. We would be all crying. It was quite something. That was Mrs. Price. This is my best friend Dixie, who was in the yellow. And our teacher was Mrs. Price, our art teacher. They all had to sign you out. She's signing out my friend Dixie. In the background, you can see some of us in our formal gowns. It was a very big deal. Then we had to work in our field of major. Mine was art, so it was photography, counted as art. And we had to come back in February for Founders Day, and that was when we would graduate. There we are, graduation. We actually made it. Okay. It was the teachers that made the difference. This was Mr. Boyle. He was a World War II veteran. He had survived, if you've ever read about this, the Bataan Death March, in which American GIs were captured in the Philippines and marched many, many, many miles, and a lot of them died along the way. Mr. Boyle survived that. So he was quite an amazing history teacher. He just really instilled in us a very great interest in American government, American history. Actually, I'm having lunch with his daughter after this, so she was in my class. Mr. House, he grew up in the Cherokee lands in Oklahoma. He was a very plain-spoken man who loved history. He loved to get off topic, so we would easily get him off topic onto something history instead of chemistry. But he also taught me everything I needed to know about photography. I'm very grateful to him because I used it not only in working my way to college, but in my job. A reporter needs to be able to take a quick picture. Now we've got the phones and we just go click. But in those days, it was quite something to be able to have that skill, and Mr. House did that for me. Okay, this was Miss Jeanette Skidmore. She was the terror of the school. Everybody has one, I think. She was scary. The first day I had her for virtually everything. I had her for English and for Latin, and I forgot what else. Sometimes I had her twice a day. Oh, and study halls. Her study halls were awful because she hit you on the back of the head if you dared say a word. So she also was a school librarian, and she locked all of the books behind in glass cabinets. So in order to take out a book, you had to ask her, and she had to ask why you were taking out the book. She guarded the books as if they were her children. It was just pretty much amazing. I learned how to repair a book, the spine and the pages and the boards, because she would have us do that. We had a 1922 English textbook that we used because she thought it was the best ever done. We had things like we had to take apart the sentence. I cranked up my flivver, and if you know what a flivver, that was a slang word for a Chevrolet in 1922 when you had to crank the car. So that's how old our books were. But that was Miss Skidmore. She believed that was the best one ever made, and that's why we had that book. My first day at Andrews, I was seventh grade, 12 years old, scared to death. I went into Miss Skidmore's class, and we had heard that she ate girls for breakfast. We just knew this was going to be bad. She sat us down and she said, okay, take out a piece of paper, put your books under your chair, put your name on it, put the date on it, and put, I think, period 6, whatever it was. And she said, now, I want you to conjugate the verb to be. I had no idea what conjugate meant. It sounded dirty to me. I don't know. But I had to conjugate the verb to be. I'm thinking, I don't know what to do. I sat there crying. I handed in a blank paper. Just scared to death that I was going to flunk out the first day at Andrews. Second day I went in, she repeated it. She said, take out a piece of paper, conjugate the verb to be. And again, I didn't know. So I cried again. Third day, the second day, I was crying, and one of the girls next to me said, "Tss, tss, it's in the back of the book." Oh. So I opened the back of the book, sure enough, there was the conjugation of the verb to be. So the next day I was prepared. Miss Skidmore was trying to get us to think about that and to try to solve the problem ourselves. She was scary. She looked like, if you've ever seen the movie The Wizard of Oz, she reminded us of the Wicked Witch of the West. She actually said one time, she had us all terrified. And she knew when you were not prepared. She knew. She'd see you and she'd go, Miss Gray, stand up. Okay, I want you to recite what we did last night. Oh gosh, I don't know. She knew when you weren't prepared. One day she would have us so terrified, she said, do you think I'm going to appear at the end of your bed at night with a peak cap on? We said, pretty much, yeah. She was amazing. If you misspelled a word in her class, she would have you stand up, spell the word correctly, and say, a misspelled word is an abomination in the sight of all. We had to do that every time we misspelled a word. So you learned after a while, don't misspell a word in Miss Skidmore's class. So I became an excellent speller. She taught us précis writing, which I'm very grateful for. She taught us how to put a sentence together. She taught us enunciation. We never dared mispronounce a word. She was that way. She looked at every detail. But the interesting thing to me was when she made it thunder and lightning. How she did that, I still don't know. But we were in Latin. Oh, plus she got arrested in the city of Troy one time, taking photographs, and the Turkish police arrested her because she came too close to some kind of military base or something. But she took photos that they didn't like, so she ended up, Miss Skidmore went to jail. Only she would do that. But once you made it thunder and lightning, we were in Latin class, and it was a very dark day. It was threatening, but nothing had happened. And she said, Jupiter Pluvius was the god of thunder and lightning. Okay. She stood up. Now, she was about this high. She always wore gray. She was a very gray person. She walked to the back of the room where she had floor-to-ceiling windows. And she said, Jupiter Pluvius. And as she did that, there was a lightning flash, thunder, and the lights went out. Wow. I think she was as astonished as we were, and she tried to hide it. But for that day, we knew that her reputation had just grown by a lot because we knew she could make it thunder and lightning and the lights go out. That was the kind of thing that Miss Skidmore did. But she would basically tell you, don't understand it, just memorize it. That sounds awful. But if you're good at memorizing, you ended up being a good student. But she taught me how to write. The mechanics of putting a sentence together that people can understand and maybe even enjoy. So when it came time to change my career, it was a no-brainer. I started writing, covering different government things. My very first story they sent me on was during a blizzard. There was a fatal accident on Route 44 in Auburn Township. And I was sent out there in the blizzard to take pictures and get all the details for the story. And I thought, okay, fine. I went out there, took the pictures, and I found out that it was a couple that were visiting from New York, and they left a little boy behind that he had no parents. So you had that kind of impact. And I had to tell that story so the people in our area would understand what had happened. So it was a great career. I loved it. I ended up winning a couple of awards, although that wasn't the important part. I think I made a difference in people's lives by informing them so that they could be informed voters. I didn't tell them how to vote, but I would tell them what happened at government meetings so they could figure out how they wanted to vote. It's an important and kind of forgotten art because everybody's on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff now, but I think the printed page is still a good thing, and I enjoy still doing it. But then, Miss Skidmore, and she came to me in a dream one night, only she would do that. I was walking along, and Miss Skidmore happened to be next to me in her little gray suit. I said, Miss Skidmore, what are you doing here? She said, I just came in to check on you and make sure you're okay. That was about 6 months ago. Yeah, I turned out okay. She said, good. And then she vanished. That was Miss Skidmore. If anyone could do it, she could. So anyway, because of Miss Skidmore, when I turned 70, I thought, I really need to do something I've always wanted to do, and that was write a book. So I found a way of self-publishing now on Amazon, and I could do that. So I wrote 5 in 3 years. I just kept writing and writing, and it was Miss Skidmore that really was. I think I was channeling her, but I ended up writing 5 books. Here they are. This is the first one, Last Flight of the Gray Geese. The second one, The Memory Thieves. The third one, Love Always, a World War II history and romance by airmail. These are the letters that my father wrote home during World War II to my mother. Their entire romance was in the mail. They had met before he went off to war. She couldn't stand him. But he talked her into writing to him as a patriotic duty back in World War II. So he won her over. He must have been a good writer too. Maybe that's where I got it from. But he wrote letters to her over 3.5 years when he was in the Pacific. And he got the nerve up to propose in the mail. He had to wait 2 weeks for her answer. They planned everything. And when he came home from the war finally, they were engaged, but they had never embraced or kissed or anything. So it was quite something, but they were married 56 years. And I thought, I need to tell that story. So that's that one. Stories just kind of need to be told. They need to come out. I inherited my mother's recipes. They were old and kind of greasy and faded. But I thought, well, I'm going to make a book of that because in the 1950s, people traded recipes. So I put those together in a book, basically for my kids and grandkids. And this is the last one so far. Little Love Notes from the Lord. And these are little uncanny experiences that I've had throughout my life, various uncanny experiences that people think of as coincidences, but I think it's really God trying to get our attention. So that's what this one is. And there's an Andrew story in that, because when I was in, time? I'm sorry, what? Okay, great. When I was in 8th grade, I came back for my schedule for the year. And Mrs. Casso was a science teacher and a cooking teacher, and I had to get my schedule from her. I knew who she was. And I went up to get my schedule. I was in 8th grade now, so I had a whole year of Andrews under my belt. I thought I knew everything. And she said, did your mother come from Jakesbury, Missouri? I thought, is that a trick question? Yes, she did. And this lady said, okay, ask her if she knows or knew Lyndon Rogers. This is odd. I'm in Wolde, Ohio. So I went home to my mom and I said, one of the teachers at Andrews asked if you knew Lyndon Rogers. And she said, oh, yeah, that was my 1st grade teacher back in the one-room schoolhouse in Jakesbury, Missouri. Now, they had lost their farm to the Dust Bowl. They had seen everything auctioned off, and they came to Ohio. So that was her 1st grade teacher back in the one-room schoolhouse in Jakesbury, Missouri. There were 3 people in the 1st grade class, my mom and 2 boys, and they were all cousins, because everybody at Jakesbury was pretty much cousins. So I went back and told Mrs. Castle, my mom said that she knew Lyndon Rogers. And Mrs. Castle said, that was my dad. What are the chances of me coming to school in a small all-girls school in Willoughby, Ohio, and coming across a woman whose father had taught my mother back in a tiny one-room schoolhouse in Jakes-Prairie, Missouri? Those are just interesting things that I've written down over the years, like, wow, that was pretty cool. So that's what this book is, sorry. That's what this book is about. So I'm going to donate all of these to the school library so you have a chance to see them. They're available on Amazon and great gifts. But at any rate, my point is, Andrews prepared me for a wonderful career and wonderful experiences. So you may not know it now, you may not appreciate it now, but someday you will. These teachers are absolutely amazing. And I hope your experience at Andrews was as amazing as mine was. Thank you.